Tonight's topic is a big one. It is about mitochondria and drug-induced mitochondrial toxicity. And you might be asking, well, what are mitochondria? And that's a good question. And I'll help educate you on that here tonight. So if I can get artsy for you for a minute here, if we well, let me change colors here. Let's say we have a cell. We are all just a bag of cells, right? Trillions of cells. And inside that cell, we have a nucleus, which we were taught in high school biology is the brain of the cell. This is where all the DNA is and the nuclear material is happening. Then we have other things out in the cell, various different components, but what we'll focus on today are the mitochondria. And in school and high school biology and college biology, and even in medical school, whether it was chiropractor, MD, whatever we took, we were taught the mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell because that's where the ATP is made. And ATP is the energy molecule or the energy currency of our body. And so historically, the thinking is that the nucleus is where the brain of the cell is because that's where the DNA is. And the DNA ultimately results in the production of proteins and a response that way. But more recent research, especially the last 10 years, reveals that actually the brain of the cell is the mitochondria. And the mitochondria are far more than just the energy producers of our cells. They definitely are the powerhouses of our cells, but to give them that as their only job would be to miss the boat in terms of how important they are for us physiologically. Mitochondria have their own genes, and many of them have, through the history of humanity, been translocated or moved into the nucleus. But the mitochondria still have their own genes and own DNA within them as well. And it's a little nerdier than we need to get today, but I just want you to understand that the mitochondrial DNA control things like the immune system, the immune response, the inflammatory response, obviously energy production, the different metabolic rates that you have, and whether you're using oxygen to make the energy or you're making energy independent of oxygen. They control all kinds of physiology in the heart and brain and kidneys and every cell because they are in every cell. And then another kind of misnomer that we were taught in biology is that, like, when they draw the cell, obviously they draw it like I did, and they show you one mitochondrion or maybe two in there. But in reality, every cell has 100 to 500 different mitochondria inside it, and cells like your skeletal muscle and your heart have thousands of mitochondria inside, because these are the guys and girls that are making the energy for us. They're turning genes on and off. They're changing our physiology in real time. They're alerting the immune system. They're producing hormones for us like cortisol and testosterone and those things. So they are the brain and the orchestrator of our physiology. So that's very important. Now, if we take that now and we say, okay, if these produce the energy for us, these drive the immune response, these drive hormone production, these do all these different jobs, then if we have mitochondrial toxicity, that's very, very bad. And as the mitochondria go downhill, our health goes downhill. Okay. And nowhere was this seen more clearly than during the HIV/AIDS epidemic, when HIV and AIDS hit. the HIV virus causes CD4 counts to drop, and CD4 counts are what doctors measure in patients with HIV or AIDS to see how's their immune system doing. Are they suppressed? And when your CD4 counts go down, you're more open to infection and cancer and bad things. And so, pharmaceutical companies were quick to put out antiretroviral drugs, or the HIV drugs. And those drugs, it turned out, were what are called mitochondrial toxic. So the HIV/AIDS patients that took those drugs ended up having all kinds of broad symptoms from the mitochondrial toxicity caused by those drugs. Some people would have neurologic symptoms like dizziness and vertigo and forgetfulness. Some patients would have pain symptoms like in their muscles and aching in joints, and they'd have weakness. Some patients would have heart rate rhythm symptoms. It depended on where and in each person, which mitochondria in which cells and organs became toxic. And so there's a doctor in San Francisco named John Kaiser who had a lot of HIV patients, and realized that his HIV patients on the antiretrovirals were getting sicker over time. And he said, I think these drugs are toxic. So he started looking at mitochondrial physiology and saying, well, how can we support the health of the mitochondria? And if we do that, do these AIDS patients do better? And so he did a little study in his office, and he found that when he supported mitochondrial health with natural nutrients and things that support mitochondrial health, those AIDS patients did better. And so he took that information and he approached Bristol Myers Squibb, which is a pharmaceutical company still today. And they were one of the pharmaceutical companies with the mitochondrial toxic drugs at the time. And they realized, the liability and things going on. He approached them and he said, listen, I've developed this natural strategy. It's working in my patients. Would you fund a randomized controlled placebo trial to prove that this works? And so, believe it or not, Bristol Myers Squibb said yes, and they ran the study in 4 different centers across the United States on HIV/AIDS patients, and they weren't Dr. Kaiser's patients; they were different patients. And so they ran the study for 24 weeks, and they gave, they had a control group that received the HIV meds, okay, that were mitochondrial toxic, and they had the AIDS group or HIV group that received the mitochondrial natural supplements, and they followed them over 24 weeks. And what they found and what they measured was the CD4 counts, because that's the marker, that they were tracking these patients with AIDS with. And after 24 weeks, the patients who had received the mitochondrial support, their CD4 counts had gone up 24% in that time. Whereas the HIV patients or AIDS patients that had standard care, which was the pharmaceuticals only, their CD4 counts had continued to drop. And so this was a randomized placebo-controlled trial run by a giant pharmaceutical company showing, hey, our drug is mitochondrial toxic, and if we support the mitochondria health in the patients taking that drug, they're not only does that keep their mitochondria healthy, but because the mitochondria drive immune function and health, their immunity actually improved over the testing period. And so I tell you all that to give you the precedence for medications, pharmaceuticals being mitochondrial toxic, and that precedence is over 40 years old, and also to show you that if we can restore mitochondrial health, you can do a lot to restore the health of ourselves and of people on medications. And then if we know certain medications are toxic, then maybe we can do better regarding which medications we choose, or allow a doctor to put us on, and choose between, choose the least mitochondrial toxic medications possible. So with that kind of lead in, let's dive into this study here that looks at mitochondrial toxic drugs, especially in the geriatric population. Why the geriatric population? Well, because geriatrics are on the most amount of drugs of any age group in our society. So if we dive in here, it says mitochondrial function declines with age, leading to a variety of age-related diseases from metabolic to central nervous system to cancer, etc. and medication usage increases with age due to increased diseases. Drug-induced mitochondrial toxicity has been described for many different drug classes and can lead to liver, muscle, kidney, and central nervous system injury, and in rare cases, death. Why such broad bad effects? Well, because all cells have mitochondria. So which mitochondria in which cells and organs suffer in which patient, that's what varies. Many of the most prescribed medications in the geriatric population carry mitochondrial liabilities, or many of them have toxicity. We suggest using medications with the best safety profile and the avoidance of concurrent usage of multiple medications that are mitochondrial toxic. In addition, we also recommend lifestyle changes to further improve one's mitochondrial function, such as weight loss, exercise, and nutrition. Okay, so there's natural things we can do from a lifestyle standpoint, from a supplement standpoint, and we'll talk about that later. But what I want to show you first is a few things in this study. So this diagram here, you can see mitochondrial dysfunction is implicated in many age-related diseases, from central nervous system to cancer, to muscle wasting, to chronic inflammation, to metabolic diseases such as diabetes and obesity and things like that, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. The lowest common denominator in all those is mitochondrial dysfunction. Recently, there was a book written by a Harvard psychiatrist named Chris Palmer. It's called Brain Energy. And basically, he wrote the book that his theory is called the brain energy theory, and he thinks all psychiatric disease is due to mitochondrial dysfunction. And you might say, well, that's crazy because, you know, there's a broad range in symptoms between anxiety and depression and schizophrenia and bipolar and dementia. And he agrees, yes, there's a broad range of different symptoms, but if you boil it all down, they can all be explained by mitochondrial dysfunction. So if you're interested in mental health, especially, read that book, Brain Energy by Chris Palmer. You can find it on Amazon. So let's dive into the medications. What this study says, which medications are most toxic. So on this table, we're showing different classes of drugs, and it says each drug class contains drugs with more or less observed mitochondrial toxicity. So this table is showing the most toxic drug is on top, and they're decreasing in toxicity as you go down the list. So let's look at these. If we look at this first list here, anti-diabetic medications. You've heard these names before. Probably Avandia is the most common one you've heard, but those are mitochondrial toxic, specifically to the liver. Okay, well, if we're trying to heal from diabetes, which is an energy deficit disease, right? You can't deliver glucose to cells. Well, if we're damaging our energy production even further by damaging mitochondria, that's the opposite of what we're trying to do to help those people heal. Looking at statin medications, the most toxic statin is Baycol, followed by Zocor, which is one of the most prescribed. Lipitor is the #1 selling statin of all time, and then Lescol is lower. These are mitochondrial toxic to muscles. If you have history taking these, or you have family members who have taken these, oftentimes I have a family member that has tried these a couple times, and they always have to stop because of the myalgia, or the muscle pain associated with taking statin drugs. And it turns out what's driving that? Well, damaging the mitochondria in the muscle. The muscle mitochondria don't make enough energy, so using the muscles makes you feel weaker and painful in those muscles. A different class of anti-diabetic medications, metformin here, you'll see is probably the most common or most well-known of this group. Thankfully, for the people who are taking metformin, which is also the most prescribed of this group, that's the least mitochondrial toxic of the group, although it does still have some toxicity. So you could consider berberine, which is a natural alkaloid from various plants that in head-to-head studies against metformin is equal to or better in helping regulate diabetes. So you might want to consider that with your practitioner. Antidepressant, anti-anxiety medications. Buspar is probably the best known one to most people here, but you've probably heard of trazodone too. Trazodone is often prescribed for people who have Sleep issues, well, that's toxic to your mitochondria. If your sleep issues are due to mitochondrial dysfunction in the brain, taking a mitochondrial toxic drug isn't going to help you over the long term that way either. Anti-lipid drugs, fibrates, you may or may not be aware of these, but these are toxic to the liver. NSAID medications, everyone's heard of these, your ibuprofen, your Aleve, right? Your aspirin, okay, your Mobic or meloxicam, Celebrex, diclofenac. Many people have used these, okay? Many people use them every single day. Well, Celebrex is the most toxic, followed by meloxicam, diclofenac, and then aspirin is the least on this list. But you'll see in a minute that aspirin is still toxic to mitochondria. Liver and intestinal mitochondria are the ones that are hit hardest by these. So you take, what do you hear from people who take these long term? They have gut issues, right? Oftentimes they have kidney issues as well. Mitochondrial toxicity is a part of that picture. Antibiotics can be toxic to your mitochondria. Levaquin is probably the most well known, but the floxin class, okay, fluoroquinolones. There's a saying that you take these antibiotics and you got floxed, so to speak. So these are mitochondrial toxic, and there's also a risk of Achilles tendon tears and other things with these medications. And then anti-cancer medications are toxic to the heart mitochondria. So, you know, when you're trying to overcome cancer, you don't also want to create heart issues if you can help it. So that's one way of looking at it. And then there's another list in this study where they're looking at the most commonly used or prescribed, the most commonly used prescription and over-the-counter medication in U.S. older adults. And we've all heard of at least some of these, okay? The first one everyone's heard of, aspirin. Okay, this is a very, you know, the most common over-the-counter pain medication. So how is aspirin toxic to mitochondria? Well, here's the list, but I pulled out specifically here, alteration of glutathione status. Glutathione is our body's master antioxidant. So if we damage glutathione status, then the oxidative stress produced in the mitochondria can get out of control and damage the mitochondria further. If you're inhibiting respiration, that's production of energy through oxygen dependent mechanisms. If you're stopping that, you know, that's bad. We're not efficient at making energy in an anaerobic environment, not as efficient as we are using oxygen. So then if we look at this list, we have multiple statin drugs. We have Zocor or Simvastatin. We have Lipitor, atorvastatin. We have Previchol, Prevastatin, Crestor, rosuvastatin. So all of these are showing mitochondrial toxicity, okay? And again, as far as Lipitor goes, which is the most prescribed, well, according to this list, Zocor is higher. I'm pretty sure Lipitor's at least made more money over its lifetime. Lipitor inhibits mitochondrial respiration in the pancreas, in the heart, and in the blood vessel walls. Not good for people who want to live, okay? Zocor inhibits the electron transport chain, which is the part of the mitochondria that make the energy for us, okay? So I take a statin, I take Zocor, and I'm tired, and I'm brain fogged, and I can't think, and my muscles hurt. Why? Why such broad and weird symptoms? Well, because you're damaging mitochondria in broad tissues and cell types. Prilosec, prescribed for heartburn, also known as omeprazole. You can get this at Costco, okay? Yeah, take it for your heartburn, no big deal. No, these drugs are toxic in so many ways, but now we're adding to the list that they're toxic to mitochondria by inhibiting carnitine supply to the mitochondria, which is key for mitochondrial function. Tylenol, okay, toxic to mitochondria by increasing oxidative stress. Lasix, which is a diuretic, okay, inhibits energy production. And many diuretics also cause depletion of magnesium and potassium, which are needed for energy and muscle relaxation, etc. The blood thinner Plavix depletes your glutathione, increases oxidative stress. That's a double whammy because the glutathione is supposed to oppose the oxidative stress. And then Aleve or naproxen, another NSAID pain reliever, inhibits the energy production. So it's not to say that these should never be used. There's a time and place for medications, but if you're using them, and then if you're using them over the long term, the issue becomes larger. And if you're like many elder Americans, if you're using this one and this one and this one and this one and this one, now the mitochondrial toxicity becomes additive, right? And just piles up and piles up and piles up. So it's important to know what you're on, which medications are mitochondrial toxic, are there less mitochondrial toxic options? And of course, obviously the goal would be to be on as few medications as close to zero as possible. So that's information from a recent study. Now, there's been a book out for a long time. It's actually out of print now, but it's called Drug-Induced Nutrient Depletion Handbook. I got this book when I was in school. I recently was at a seminar where James Laval spoke, and he's one of the writers of this book. He was great. And he says for every drug that his patients are on, he has them take 100 milligrams of CoQ10 because so many drugs are toxic to the mitochondria and deplete CoQ10 levels. And CoQ10 is key for mitochondrial function. So interesting anecdote from him. But this is a book worth looking up and seeing if you can get it on Amazon or someone who's selling it. If you look at it, it's broken down really nice. It's 300 pages. This version is anyway. And if I turn it this way for you, it has basically, let's find a drug that we know. Oh, there's one, diclofenac. So that's one of the NSAIDs here. So basically what it does is the book, here's my pointer. It gives you your drug, okay? It gives you the different brand names for it, even Canadian brand names. What kind of drug is it? It's an NSAID, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, so pain reliever. Nutrients it depletes. This depletes your folic acid or your folate, vitamin B9. So if you're taking this drug, this book helps you know, okay, what could I potentially become depleted in by being on this drug long term? In this case, vitamin B9. Well, if you're somebody that has an MTHFR mutation and you're taking a lot of diclofenac, you may start having other symptoms that seem unrelated, like cardiovascular issues or nervous system issues, because when you lower your folate level and you have that MTHFR variant, perhaps your homocysteine goes up and now you're having more brain fog and headaches and heart rate rhythm issues, blood pressure, who knows? Okay, so this book can be very useful again. And hey, here's the medications I'm on, looking up and seeing what potential nutrient depletions they can drive. Okay, so here's a topical corticosteroid, just as an example. Okay, a topical steroid that you might use on your skin for something. Okay, corticosteroid topical. What nutrients might it deplete? Calcium, folic acid, magnesium, potassium, selenium, vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc. Wow, just because I rub something on my skin, you might think that a topical is harmless, but if you're using this long term for skin issues and you start having all kinds of other issues, well, these are all many nutrients we've covered in other videos that are key to immune system, thyroid function, connective tissue, collagen, all kinds of stomach acid production, immunity, bone health, muscle health, all kinds of things. So a great book to look up and check out. And then I had another study here that I'll just point you to if you're interested in it. You can Google this title and read it. It is amazing. I'd say if you're extra analytical and want to know more about this, anything that Robert Nouveau writes on mitochondria is cutting edge. He's one of the leading researchers in the field. And in this study, he's got a lot of great images, and he's saying, hey, conventional medicine looks at disease in silos, like autism is its own disease, and PTSD is its own disease, and Lyme is its own, and Pandas is its own, and Parkinson's is its own. We research them as silos and as individual entities, but he says, no, what they really are is a loss of health especially in the mitochondria, or specifically, he's saying you're stuck in a healing cycle that you didn't complete. So you have an injury or a sickness. Okay, so like normal health is this, and now you have a stressor, a trigger, an injury, an infection, something like that, which takes you out of the health cycle and sets you into what's called the cell danger response, which has 3 phases, which essentially you're triggering mitochondria to stimulate the immune system to respond, and it responds in a predictable 3-phase way. But if you get stuck in any one of these phases and don't complete the healing and go back to the health cycle, that's when the chronic disease and illness occurs. And so, instead of saying, hey, these are all individual diseases, it's no, they are different symptom manifestations of people that are stuck in different parts of this healing cycle in different tissues. So worth the read if you're interested in that. This could be a whole series of Mondays for us, but I just wanted to show that to you today. So take home, if you're on medications, realize that, and this isn't rocket science to you, you knew there's potential side effects of any medication, but realize that many medications are mitochondrial toxic, and depending on where that toxicity manifests in your mitochondria, in which cells and organs, tissues, depends on the symptoms you have. And the more medications you're on, the more you're stacking toxicity, and so the more likely it is to happen. So your quote unquote rapid decline of our geriatric patients or of our family members may track or correlate with the rapid increase in medications as they've stacked together. So speaking with a practitioner, printing the study off, showing it to them and saying, hey, are there less toxic forms in this drug class we could switch my family member to, or is it possible to incorporate maybe some weight loss or exercise or nutrition to help decrease the necessity of these medications at all? Like I said in the beginning, the authors say we should be on the safest medications, least toxic possible. In addition, lifestyle changes to promote mitochondrial function, weight loss, exercise, nutrition. And then they say here, consequently, bolus supplementation with mitochondrial cofactors, so large doses of mitochondrial nutrients in the form of supplements, has less potential than long-term lifestyle changes in extending vitality and drug tolerance in aging populations. So in other words, they're saying don't adopt the same just pop a pill mentality that you adopted to get on all the medications. You're replacing pharmaceuticals with nutraceuticals in that instance. You're just saying, okay, well, what mitochondrial supplement should I take? And I'll just take doses of that to offset the medication. A classic example would be statin drugs are known to cause depletion of CoQ10. Like every medical doctor knows that now, right? So what they'll do is say, well, just take CoQ10 while you're on your statin. Okay, yeah, that could be like a Band-Aid, but doc, how about we get our patients to implement weight loss and exercise and nutrition, so dare I say they don't even need the statin anymore. That would be the best long-term way to promote vitality in our aging population and in our young population. So let's not just try and erase things with pills, whether it's pharmaceutical or natural, but improve the lifestyle so that we don't need as many pills, period, natural or pharmaceutical.